Napoleon Bonaparte was born Napoleon Bonaparte on the French island of Corsica on August 15, 1769. In 1779, young Napoleon began attending the military academy at Brienne for 5 years. His classmates were the children of French nobles and bullied Napoleon for being a foreigner. At age 15, Napoleon moved on to the military academy in Paris. After returning to Corsica, Napoleon got behind the Corsican resistance to the French occupation. He sided with his former ally, Pasquale Paoli, but the two soon had a falling out and became enemies. When civil war broke out in Corsica, Napoleon and his family relocated to France. He changed his name to the French version, Bonaparte. When Napoleon returned to France, he joined the French military. The French Revolution was in full swing and there were opportunities for ambitious military leaders like Napoleon. He rose to the ranks being associated with the Jacobins, a far-left political movement. Its leaders, Augustin and Maximilien Robespierre, were the main force behind what is now known as the Reign of Terror. About 40,000 people were killed between 1793 and 1794, but the Robespierres were eventually executed and Napoleon put under house arrest. In 1795, he helped to suppress a royalist insurrection against the revolutionary government and was promoted to brigadier general. In 1796, Napoleon was commanding the French army. The army in Italy was a post that he really coveted. The army was only about 30,000 strong and were disgruntled and underfed. This ambitious young military commander invigorated and turned this force around. They defeated the Austrians, which turned into be an expansion of the French Empire. Napoleon had become a very powerful military figure. France wanted to disrupt the British trade routes, so Napoleon decided to go to Egypt. There he defeated the Ottomans who ruled the Egyptian military at the Battle of the Pyramids. However, his naval fleet was almost wiped out by the British in the Battle of the Nile. That left him and his army stranded. No ride back, I guess. Now get this, Napoleon has been blamed for blowing the nose off the Sphinx by cannonballs fired by the army. This is pretty much considered to be a false legend since drawings of the Sphinx by Frederick Louis Norden in 1737 already showed the nose missing, predating Napoleon's arrival by 60 years. However, Napoleon did discover the Rosetta Stone. Captain Pierre-François Xavier Bouchard unearthed the inscribed slab during the demolition of an ancient wall in the city of Rosetta. Then Russia, Austria, Turkey, and Britain ganged up on France with a coalition. Napoleon's army lost much of Italy. He left his army while they were still fighting and went back to France. After returning to France, Napoleon participated in an event known as the Coup of the 18 Brumaire. He helped overthrow the newly Jacobean-controlled Directory on November 9, 1799. A new government called the Consulate was now ushered in. This consisted of 3 members, of which Napoleon was named the first consulate. He was France's leading political figure. Wow, who saw that coming?
Sway's the boss.
Now get this, Napoleon stood about 5'7" tall, making him slightly taller than the average Frenchman at his time. Over time, Napoleon's height has been highlighted, and legend claims that he was unusually short. This brought about the term Napoleon complex, which is an inferior complex associated with people of short stature. Many historians attribute the myths about Napoleon's height to simple British propaganda. In 1800, he defeated the Austrians at the Battle of Marengo. He drove them right out of Italy. Napoleon worked to transform France's economical, legal, and educational system, even the church, as he reinstated Roman Catholicism as the state religion. He was very busy to negotiate European peace, partly through the 1802 Treaty of Amiens, a truce with war-weary Britain. That truce didn't even last a year.
Are you serious?
You bet I'm serious.
The same year, his reforms proved popular, and he was elected consul for life. Who saw that one coming?
What a guy.
What a guy!
Napoleon orchestrated the Napoleonic Code. These were civic codes which streamlined the French legal system. This is still in use throughout Europe and North America today. One weird thing about the Napoleonic Code was that it was illegal to name a pig Napoleon in France. Man, I'm glad we're in America. Come here, Napoleon. Oh, he's such a ham. As Napoleon was rising through the ranks, his personal life was also on the rise. He met Josephine de Beauharnais, who was about 6 years older than he was, at a party in 1793. She was the widow of General Alexander Beauharnais, who was guillotined during the Reign of Terror. Whose husband wasn't guillotined back then?
The guillotine.
Guillotine?
She was a mother of 2. She said this about Napoleon: altogether strange in all his person. But they were married on March 9, 1796. The Union had problems from the outset when Napoleon's military campaigns forced him away from home for long periods of time. Neither one of them was faithful, and Napoleon had at least 2 children out of wedlock. His marriage lasted 13 years, but he annulled the marriage because she bore him no children. In 1803, he sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States for $15 million. That's $381 million in today's money. He gave the U.S. a bargain partly because he needed money for more war campaigns. These campaigns became known as the Napoleon Wars. Now get this, in 1804 he crowned himself the Emperor of France in a very lavish event at the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Wow, who would have ever predicted that? In 1805, the British registered an important naval victory against the French at the Battle of Trafalgar. Napoleon's navy was all but wiped out. This defeat led Napoleon to rethink his plans to invade England. Instead, he focused on Austria and Russia, beating both militaries in the Battle of Austerlitz. That victory was probably his greatest. It dissolved the Holy Roman Empire and created the Confederate Republic. Napoleon's army defeated the Prussians at Jena and Arstadt in 1806 and the Russians in Ala and Friedland in 1807. These defeats forced the signing of the Treaty of Tilsit. You know, Napoleon did marry again to Archduchess Maria Louise of Austria. She wrote in her diary that just looking at Napoleon, and I quote, would be the worst form of torture. However, she complied and married Napoleon in March 1810. Marie Louise gave Napoleon the heir he desired as the couple had a son, Napoleon II, the King of Rome, on March 20th, 1811. Now get this, Napoleon was still in contact with Josephine, his ex-wife. He made several unannounced visits. In 1813, he even brought his new son to meet her. Believe it or not, this made Marie Louise jealous, but she did stay married to him until his death. Well, the beginning of the end was his invasion of Russia. The Russians didn't want to engage with Napoleon in battle. What they would do is retreat every time there was going to be a confrontation. Napoleon was brought deeper and deeper into Russia. Well, they were not really for that long, drawn-out campaign. He had a major defeat at the Battle of Borodino. His troops marched into Moscow just to find that the Russians had set the whole thing on fire so Napoleon's troops would be deprived of supplies. Napoleon had no choice but to retreat, and he was harassed all the way out. What happened to Napoleon was a major blow. Now get this, he started out with 600,000 troops, and when it was all said and done, he was left with about 10,000. It was simply brilliant by the Russians. At the same time this was going on, the French army was being driven out of the Iberian Peninsula. They had a major defeat at the Battle of Leipzig. The combined forces of Austrian, Prussian, Russian, and Swedish troops ganged up on this bully. You know, when enemies see weakness, they always take advantage, don't they? In 1814, Napoleon retreated back to Paris. Napoleon surrendered on March 30th. About a week later, on April 6th, Napoleon was forced to abdicate power and went into exile on the island of Elba. That's off the Italian coast in the Mediterranean Sea. Well, his exile did not last very long. In March 1815, Napoleon escaped the island and quickly made his way back to Paris. King Louis fled and Napoleon triumphantly returned to power. Napoleon gathered together a new army. On June 16, 1815, Napoleon led French troops into Belgium and defeated the Prussians. However, 2 days later, he was defeated by British, reinforced by Prussian troops at the famous Battle of Waterloo. This was his final blow, a really humiliating loss, and on June 22, 1815, Napoleon abdicated his powers for good. After Napoleon's abdicate from power, the British government did not want a repeat of the early return from the exile of Elba. They sent Napoleon to the island of St. Helena in the southern Atlantic Ocean. He lived there for the rest of his life. He was free to do as he pleased there. Napoleon wasn't afraid of cats, but he disliked them. However, when he was in exile, he did adopt one, strangely enough. Here's something really strange. Napoleon couldn't seem to ever get over his ex-wife, Josephine. She died of pneumonia in 1814. He had portraits of her placed throughout his residence and even ate off of plates with her likeness on them. Marie Louise never saw him again. However, the tedious routine of his life soon got to him, and he would shut himself indoors many days. In 1817, Napoleon's health began to deteriorate. In early 1821, he was bedridden and growing weaker by the day. That April, he dictated his last will. He said, "I wish my ashes to rest on the banks of the Seine, in the midst of that French people which I have loved so much. I die before my time, killed by English oligarchy and its hired assassins. While he was dying, he requested licorice-flavored water. It was one of his favorite treats. Apparently his teeth were discolored from eating it so much. He had been experiencing symptoms such as vomiting, excessive hiccups, and blood clots. Allegedly, while he was dying, he uttered his ex-wife's name Josephine as his final word. After his death on May 5th, 1821, at the age of 51, an autopsy determined that it was stomach cancer that killed him. This is the same thing that killed his own father. In 1814, he was exhumed, ordered by the king, and his remains were brought back to France. Some say he was poisoned. After he was moved to France, locks of his hair were tested and found to have traces of arsenic. Napoleon himself gave suspicion when he talked about dying before his time, murdered by the English oligarchy and some assassins. A less dramatic, plausible alternative is that Napoleon could have been exposed to poison through toxic fumes given off by wallpaper at his prison home. It might have came through its glue and dyes for coloring. Napoleon's greed for power was his own undoing. He was ultimately responsible for his own exile. That is strange indeed. We'll keep the videos coming here on Strange History. Hey, check out our video on General George Custer. He was also defeated in the end.